Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Marketing at Low Tide, How to Recession-Proof Your Marketing Department webinar. My name is Ali Gadbot, and I'm the AGC Member Engagement Manager. I wanted to welcome you all this morning. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. This presentation is packed full and will probably go quite close to the 12:30 drop. If you have questions, we will be using the Q&A module. So please type any questions that you might have in there, and we will get to some of them as much as possible at the end during the quick Q&A. But in the event that your question is not answered, Allison will be available to be reached after the presentation. Please make sure that you are signed in with a first and last name so that I can make sure to include you in the follow-up email with the slide deck, the checklist, and her contact information. So Allison, take it away.
Thank you so much, Ali, and thank you to AGC Oregon Columbia chapter. This is something I've been looking forward to for a long time now, since we started these conversations. And I've given this presentation to 13 chapters of SMPS so far across the country, and a couple other settings for ACEC and some other different organizations. This is the first time an organization has bought the book to give to participants. So really excited about that. And yeah, Ali's right. It is jam-packed with information. It's a little bit of a fire hose, but I think it's a full story and it has to be told all at once. So thank you for bearing with me as I go through, and I hope that you get a lot out of it. And if you do have any kind of follow-up question that you don't feel comfortable asking in this setting, you are more than welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk to you about it. This is not pay for play kind of thing. I'm not looking for consulting work out of it. I just love this subject so much, and I know that a lot of people are thinking about it a lot right now. And if you ever need a partner in crime to think through how your firm can weather what we're in the middle of, I'd be more than happy to play that part. So before I start sharing my screen and the slide deck, I wanted to give a little bit of background on why I did this in the first place. I'm 42 years old. I started in the industry after grad school, and that was right at about 2008. And I didn't even know what an RFP was, but I was professionally trained in InDesign. I could write and I could deal with last minute deadlines. And so I got a job pretty easily as a marketing coordinator, not even knowing, the ins and outs of AEC, what an RFP was. But I go, we'll teach you that. So I get in, and it was like a tuning fork going off. I absolutely fell in love with it. And I was really starting to feel like I was hitting my stride when the bottom fell out. The recession was already happening when I got the job, but there was a delay in it really impacting the A and the E. Construction obviously got hit pretty early on, as it usually does. But my firm didn't feel it until about 2010. And when they did, it was pretty catastrophic because it wasn't just us. A lot of firms around the country were starting to either go under, get acquired, merge. You saw pretty well-known figures within the marketing world getting laid off, getting fired, especially directors and managers. There were hiring freezes, salary freezes, positions going unfilled, and it was pretty devastating to marketing coordinators who felt like they didn't matter during that time because the RFPs had slowed down. And I couldn't let it go. And so over the years, as the expansion took hold and the economy started to roar again, I had moved jobs to an economic planning firm that specializes in AEC, that does a lot of forecasting. And people were asking me, when is the next recession going to come? Because the expansion had been lasting so long. And, we started telling them, well, here's the indicators you can look at and track. And I started thinking, well, when it does come again, what is it going to mean for marketing? And so I started to do some deep dives into that, and this deck is the result of it. Last year, I won office for the city of Beaverton as a city councilor, which has been an interesting new peek behind the curtain of city government and how work is procured. But I ended up taking a sabbatical, and that's when I wrote the book. And so now it's out there, and and I've had the opportunity to get this presentation. So that is a little bit of background. And with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I believe you should be able to see that. Allie, can you just give me a quick heads up that that's working okay?
Looks good.
Excellent. Okay, so to dive right into things, we're going to cover 4 topic areas. One feeds pretty neatly into the next. And the first one is just to sit back and talk about recession and directly how it impacts the AEC industry. The next is why, when it does start impacting our industry, firm leadership tend to make these really interesting, idiosyncratic decisions with their marketing that does not play out the same in other types of industries. So what is that firm psychology, and why do our firms typically and traditionally start gouging into their marketing resources in recessions? And then once we cover those 2 areas, we're going to pivot and start talking about what marketing departments can do, both in the short term as just recession-oriented action steps, and then move into 10 tasks that I believe should be done every single year, both to shore up your marketing resources and make sure you're always really agile and ready to pivot into any situation you need to, but also to continue to build and instill trust in your firm leadership so that when difficult times inevitably come, that marketing is at the table as part of the solution instead of being talked about at that table. So to dive into recession, I wanted to start with this graphic because I think there's so much of a story here. What you're looking at is every single recession that has occurred since World War II. The gray bars are the recessions, the white space in between are the periods of expansion, and the blue line is the gross domestic product. And you'll notice that with every single recession, there's a correlation with the gross domestic product declining. And then as you go into an expansion, it might like trend down a little, but it's fairly a trajectory that goes upwards. And so since the end of World War II, we've tracked several different recessions, but they tend to be triggered by different things. Some of them are triggered to inflation and the Federal Reserve hiking up interest rates. Some of them are tied to global issues and instability around the world. Some of them are tied to pandemics. Some of them are tied to really bad lending practices and bubbles forming. So they can get triggered by a lot of things. But what happens is it creates fear and uncertainty, which rocks the financial markets and just creates this kind of freezing of people's I guess, appetite for taking on risk and trying new things and growing. And so we see unemployment rise and we see the gross domestic product fall. But an important thing to note is that when we average things out, that the typical recession lasts about 12 months and average expansions last around 3 years, but they can last a lot longer. I mean, the last one we had was the longest in US history. And there are some countries around the world that have had economic expansions last for decades. So there's really no shelf life to it. It's just you have to be prepared that occasionally forces are going to be at work that are going to rock the economy, and it takes a while to restabilize. But the good news is that they do restabilize. And if you take anything away from the slide, it's that since we know that the average recession lasts for about a year, that means that there is always going to be an after. There's always going to be expansion again. So we need to bear that in mind, that even while we're feeling short-term pressures on our firms, the good times always come back around again. So to talk about this recession in particular, and this is not new to anybody in this, but in about April of last year, it was the end of March, early April, the economy completely shut down and we started to see a lot of businesses just shuttering their services, especially in the service industry, the retail, trade, and tourism. But these numbers skyrocketed to levels that were absolutely unprecedented in the US. And the good news is that even though the numbers spiked from being at a historic low to being at a historic high, pretty quickly, those numbers started to fall. And so you see there's like this really steep fall that occurred throughout the spring and summer of last year. And then it just kind of starts tapering and to where we find ourselves now. And the reason why you had such a drastic fall in the unemployment rate was because a lot of those positions that had been put on pause were people being furloughed, firms that were being extremely cautious when the shutdown first started happening, and they just kind of pressed the pause button on everything. And then they started to reopen. Those positions came back online. People went back to work. And so the numbers start to slow down. And the numbers that you see here now, the unemployment rate and where it's hovering is really jobs that are tied to specific industries that are inordinately impacted by the recession. And that's tourism, there's retail, shopping, and other folks in those types of sectors. The numbers as of now are still trending downward, and it's about, I think, 560 million people are claiming unemployment around the country as of right about this time. I think the last figures were out at the end of May. So pivoting from that into what does this cause? How does this play out when you see those unemployment numbers that are so high compared to where they were just a year and change ago? I'm going to focus on the public sector for a lot of this conversation, but it has some real world implications for the private sector of what happens in the public sector. So at the state level and at the federal level, taxes and where the monies are coming from are very, very different than at the regional and local level. I'm going to focus on the regional and local level for the bulk of this part of the presentation. But to talk about where that money is coming from and why we're seeing cities and counties hit harder than the state level is because the major tax revenue streams that is very common for cities and counties typically fall into these 5 categories. You've got sales tax in some states, some not in others. I'm sure we have folks that are listening from both Southern Washington and from the Portland metropolitan area. We've got property tax, transient lodging taxes, or TLTs, which are the fees that we get from everyone staying in a hotel, gas tax, and lottery tax. Sales tax, obviously, people really curtailed their spending in the last year. They changed their spending habits, and we're just starting to see people feel a little bit more secure and confident about going out and spending dollars. And also, they couldn't spend it. The movie theaters were closed down. All these opportunities to go out and spend their money just weren't available. So we saw some pretty drastic dips in the incomes that were coming in through the sales tax. And those are divvied up at the state level and kind of fed out into the community. So that is one taxing mechanism. Property tax is a major revenue stream, especially at the city level. And those typically are a little recession-proof because people will do whatever they have to do to make sure that they pay that so that they don't run the risk of losing that property. But the last 3 were hit extraordinarily hard. TLT especially, but also gas tax. People weren't commuting anymore, and the gas tax, which has already been trending down because of fuel efficiency, it took a major hit. The lottery tax, well, it's just now starting to come back. There was also a very significant decline in the revenues coming in that way because people simply were not gambling their money away. In April of last year, there was a poll that was taken of cities all around the country, and 88% at that time said they were predicting that there was going to be a revenue shortfall. And it's essentially come up to 100% of cities have had their budgets affected in some way or another. And so it's another part of the early forecasting, and you can visit the link here at the bottom. We'll take you to a really interesting site that aggregates out every single state and the early forecasting that they were doing and what the impacts were going to potentially be to their states. You'll notice if you do go to that some states like Hawaii or Florida were anticipating really big declines in revenue because their economies are so closely tied to tourism dollars. Other states weren't really predicting too much of a hit at all, like Iowa, for instance, or other places where they don't have as much of that type of sector. In Oregon, and then also in Washington, they were looking at a little over $1 billion in both states that they were just thinking that money was not going to be there to fund services and capital improvement projects and other things. And so what happened is that states made extremely conservative moves in 2020. And like in the case of Denver and the state of Colorado, at both the state level and at the city level, they curtailed spending. They left positions unfilled. They did some really creative cost saving in 2020, and they were very pleasantly surprised when they went into doing their fiscal budgets in 2021, 2022 to find that there was more money. So these numbers haven't really played out in the ways that people feared, which is wonderful. However, we are seeing shortfalls. We are seeing that there is less money, but the next turn of the wheel is that at the federal level, they instituted the American Rescue Plan Act, or known as ARPA, which was $65.1 billion that would be meted out to, as they put it, cities, towns, and villages all across America. There's also some really interesting calculators that you can go onto. The League of National League of Cities has a great one where you can see essentially every single populace in the country and how much money that they got. But that money going to these different cities is just kind of coloring the picture even more. So where there were shortfalls, they now have some funds to come in and maybe continue on with projects that would have been stalled out or canceled. But we are noticing that the funds that are coming in, they are not being used necessarily to backfill existing project work that the AEC industry can propose on necessarily, depending on what market sectors you really focus on. They're going to social services, they're going to small business outreach and help in that regard. They're going to folks that have been on the bubble for losing their housing and other things like that. But in certain sectors, especially multifamily and affordable housing, we're going to see some pretty good consistent numbers available there. But then on top of that, in the good side of things, there was a lot of bonds that were passed in the last handful of years when confidence was really high and the voters thought, okay, let's make these big commitments to redo our schools, to create affordable housing. So there's still bond money available that will help keep some RFPs coming out the door. And the state DOTs are also, they still have lots of work they got to get done. So it's looking like the impacts of this recession, which economists are arguing over when it officially ended, because the recession did end, but the impacts of it are going to continue, and they're going to echo and reverberate at least through the next 2 years. And it is possible we could end up in what's called a double dip recession. So before I move out of this section, I want to talk about this alphabet soup for a second. As I'm sure everyone on this call is very familiar with, the cost of materials are absolutely skyrocketing for a variety of reasons. And that is really making banks nervous. That's making municipalities nervous and others that have to go in with a level of certainty on what the final product is going to cost them, or the final build. And so that could also play out in making things take longer, things stall out, and all of that, as well as the fact that we're starting to see variants of the virus coming out that are not responding to the vaccine. If we reopen the economy and we surge back into expansion and everyone starts to get that confidence back, they start hugging each other again and going out to the movies again and taking their masks off, and then another wave hits of COVID, it could plunge us right back into the situation we were in last year. So the economists are arguing over what type of a shape of recovery it's going to look like. Is it going to be the V, which is the best case scenario of you fell into it fast and you climb out of it fast? Is it going to be a U, which is what a traditional recession looks like, where you fall into it really fast and it's a gradual coming out, and then once you're out the other side, you shoot back up? The double dip, or W. And L is kind of a doomsday approach. No one takes that really seriously, that we just stay like this forever. But what is really kind of playing out right now is a K recovery, where you're seeing some sectors that are recovering pretty nicely or never were really that impacted to begin with. Like grocery stores and shipping companies and folks like Amazon and online retailers and things like that. But you're seeing others that are still languishing, and it's still quite a struggle for them to keep closing these financial gaps as they're waiting for things to get better. But at the end of the day, it still is too early to tell. And so because of that, we have to operate off of assumptions. And I think that it's just a safer path to anticipate that we're still in for more rapids up ahead of us. It's not going to be just smooth sailing. And so if we do come into it with that kind of assumption, that's going to allow us to be much more strategic about how we're approaching our firms, our strategic planning, our growth strategies, and every other decision that we make in our company. So to go back to the recession and how this played out last time, that recession was colored by a lot of really, really problematic and in some cases illegal practices that were happening in our financial industries that caused massive collapses all across the country in the housing markets. We saw these financial institutions that seemed to have such permanence about them failing, and sometimes on the same day. Like the news was just one thing after another. It caused so much fear within the investor world that stock markets absolutely took a nosedive. And subsequently, we started to see that really hit home at a cellular level for people. All of a sudden, their homes weren't worth what they were a day ago, and they're underwater on their mortgages. You started to see people losing their jobs and these layoffs, especially the industry trades. Construction especially was hit extremely hard. And then unemployment goes up, the foreclosures started happening, the tax base has shrunk, and the public and private sectors stalled out in spectacular fashion, so much so that they actually called it the Great Recession, which, after what we've just been through, we might need to revise that. But so what that did to the AEC industry is RFPs really slowed to a trickle. We started to see projects either getting paused or outright canceled. RFPs that were going to be coming out for projects were put on the shelf, stopped midway through. Phase 1 done, and then phase 2 TBD. The on-calls and those rosters and the IDIQs, all of that stuff was still out there. You still had to spend your money and resources to put together packets to get on them, but there was no work coming out of the on-calls. So you have this false sense of security, like, oh, we've won like 20 on-calls this year, but there was nothing coming out of them. And then another thing, and this is something I've actually seen play out at my city in my role as a counselor, is conversations really start to shift in the public sector about their own resources, because those public sector dollars aren't just funding RFP work, they're also funding FTE and the staff that work at cities, and they don't want to lose people either. So they're constantly trying to think of how to cover just their overhead. And part of that is making sure their staff have enough to do and keeping them busy. They start saying things like, for instance, there's a road diet project happening out here in Beaverton. We had gone through, concept planning and preferred alternatives and come up with that. And now we're at this stage where we're moving into deeper into the project. And there was a conversation where a transportation engineer at the city said, well, what we're trying to figure out right now is ... whether we should hire a consultant because consultants are expensive, or if we should just hire another FTE here at the city for $75,000 a year and have them do it in-house. That, because consultants are expensive, is not something that you would have heard in November or December of 2019. And so the value of every single dollar just means something a little different right now. And because of all of these factors, it's likely that our firms are going to see just irregularities in our backlog and year-end profits that look very different for the next couple of years than they did in 2017, 18, 19. And because of that, because of what's happening to the firm down the road from you or what you're hearing in the industry, you start thinking through, we need to batten down the hatches and we got to prepare for some lean times ahead. So this table which was pulled from the International Journal of Construction Education and Research, is from a really interesting article that was released in May of 2018. And they were looking back on the Great Recession, and they were looking at the ways that construction firms survived it. What did they do to reduce overhead? And so I think it was like 363 firms across the country participated in this survey, which is a really good sample size. And the overall, the different tactics that were taken, which are categorized from the most to the least, it was those year-end bonuses just stopped, they, drastically reduced or cut, completely eliminated. And then the parties, the functions, the gift baskets, training opportunities. You started to see the 401k plans getting the pause button hit on those contributions. And then you started to see at the C-suite level, people freezing their salaries. But you'll notice that there's actual humans on here. This is the only category that falls on here is business development staff, which for better or I think for worse are considered overhead in most AEC firms. And that was considered a cost-saving tactic that was widely used in throughout the industry. And this is troubling for many, many reasons, not only just for people who are marketing professionals and their security in their firms and their livelihoods, but it has major implications for how that firm is going to heal as the recession is coming out. And so the question here, and the question that really got me thinking about this subject in the first place and why I wanted to do all this research was we are business to business firms. We are direct business to business. And if that is true, then why would B2B firms that are wholly dependent on business development sacrifice the very staff that they hire to do this? And as we pivot into the next portion of the presentation, I think that it's because they forget that they're a brand first and they are a service provider second. And what I mean by that is really at the heart of the very unique nature of the thing that we sell. And so to drill into that, we have to distinguish between the professional services of what we offer and widgets. And so I'm sure anyone who's taken an Econ 101 class or a business class has heard this term before. All it really is a representation for a thing. If you just pause while you're listening to me and look at every single thing around you, on you, in front of you, every single thing you see, the chair you're sitting on, the roof over your head, all of it is a widget. It is something that is manufactured and it is sold to a buyer. And it's clothing, it's cars, dish detergent, toys, and on and on. Professional services, on the other hand, is what exists inside of our brain. It's an accumulation of knowledge that is specific to an industry, specific to a niche or a field that is valued in the market. And so it's a little harder to tease out who needs that service in some cases, but we have professional services all around us, from the work that we do in consulting to the real estate agent who's helping you find or sell a house, to your lawyer, your accountant, and so on. And these types of the value that comes with this is not as easy as saying like, oh, look, it comes in 6 different colors. It's a much more nuanced conversation to demonstrate the value. And the main difference is that with a widget, you can try it out before you buy it. The person who made it can look at buying trends and modify or repackage it, change it over time, make it better, improve on it, change the formula to suit new tastes or to react to new competition coming on the market. And perhaps most importantly, it can be returned. If you don't like it, you can get your money back. Not all the time, but it's pretty common. Professional services, on the other hand, are very intangible, and they are based on things like reputation, past work, word of mouth, and the transactional nature of how you derive new business is extremely high touch. It's not as simple as making a commercial or buying an ad or getting some product placement on the TV show. This is people talking to people, having meetings, and really getting to know each other on a meaningful level to build trust. And when it comes to our firms in particular, we have staff across the firm that do business development and marketing, but it's teased out in ways that affect the ego differently. So a lot of our firms were started by an individual, someone who was really, really good at what they did and distinguished in a way, was entrepreneurial, was great at selling. And a lot of our firms still have their name or their initials even baked in to the name of the company. And so and it's not just them, it's also all the other quote unquote seller doers that they know that their clients value them. It's not just that they are a engineer or that they're a superintendent or that they're a foreman or an architect. It's that they are them and they have their particular way of doing it. They have a great success rate or a book of business, but they start to think about this is me. I'm good at getting work. If I just keep doing good work, I'm going to keep getting hired. There's a lot of I statements that are in there. But when that small firm that person starts grows into 50 people, 100, 300, 2,000 people, it's now about a name and logo recognition. It's about your value statements, your mission statement, the collective body of work. It's also about a lot more people, a lot more individuals, and it's about building the trust of your firm as it is distinguished from another firm. So it turns from being an I and into a we. And when it's a we, that is a brand. And if you have a brand, you have to have people that are skilled and trained in how to nurture and take care of a brand, which is your marketing and business development department. So another thing before we move out of this section of the presentation is somewhat marketing 101, but it is so elementary that I think people overlook it, and it's incredibly important. And it's these two concepts that are intrinsically entwined with each other. The first one is called the share of voice. And all that means is it's the amount of money that you spend versus your competitors on your brand awareness. So it's sponsoring events, it's attending them, it's any monies that you put into your social media, it's the amount of money that you spend on your website overhaul, it's advertising and different components that are making sure that your message is getting out to the marketplace. The second concept is the share of market. And the share of market is essentially how much of a given pie do you control versus your competition. And then, so here's where these two things are completely connected with each other. And I'm just going to read this verbatim because it's really important. When a brand's share of voice is greater than its share of market, it's likely to grow its market share in the coming year. Therefore, companies that increase their marketing investment when most others are cutting back have an opportunity to substantially improve the standing of their brands. And if we take that and overlay it over what happened during the Great Recession, and you look at the firms that just slashed and burned through their marketing departments and basically kind of turned the lights off for a while, they were not ready when the economy opened up again. They were essentially standing at the start line, tying their shoelaces while everyone is running. And so for the marketers that are in this presentation webinar, the way that you message this to your firm leadership is that these two things cannot be mutually exclusive and they cannot be extracted out from each other. So if they are going to be making cuts that are going to affect their ultimate share of voice, they will see some kind of reaction on the share of market side. So it's a really good way to reorient this conversation to be less about my job security and more about your firm's security or our firm's security. And so again, if those concepts are true, and that it's just an elementary part of you pull this lever, this is going to happen over here. Why, again, would firms do this? Why would they cut their nose off to spite their face, essentially? And so here's where we start to get into the serious part of this conversation, is that we had 10 years of an economic expansion, 10 years of reactive marketing to opportunities just flying at us in every way possible. And that is a very long time of doing one kind of marketing. It's very easy to lose that muscle tone of how to work in a recession. And if that's the case, a lot of our firms start to see us as only being this one type of thing. And that's because recessions don't come around very often. We get very complacent into thinking that marketing in AEC is about making a good website, knowing InDesign, putting out proposals, networking. And we just have it in our head that there's this set checklist of things. And if all those things start pausing, then why do I need the people around paying to do that if it's not there anymore? And I think that it really comes down to the fact that firms just lack faith that marketers are as valuable during recession as they are during expansions. And that's because we are so focused on this that there's not enough time to really start digging back into strategy and staying at the very front end of change and innovation and keeping that competitive edge, because this is in our head all the time, is that this is what marketing is. And I know that simplifies it, but when you're just constantly batting away proposals, you forget that marketing in the AEC industry is actually this, surrounded by multiple discrete tasks that exist within each one of these marketing functions that in turn help create opportunities for you to parlay other discrete tasks you're doing in other functions, with the ultimate goal that all of this turns into pre-positioning for those ultimately very important proposals that you respond to. And each one of these has to happen. It can't not happen. I mean, it can not happen, but every single one of these that you decide is not important, or just begins to languish, or doesn't have someone attending to it, is a part of your voice. So the more of these that you start to shutter or deprioritize, you might not know it, but you're turning down the volume of your voice in the marketplace. And so to talk a little bit again about that one trick pony and like the only stuff that marketing does in an economic expansion, we think about all the work, the public and the private work, the proposals. We start to see expansions. We see new office build outs, which I know a lot of folks were doing at the end of 2019. It's office space that we haven't really needed all that much in the last year. People were blowing up websites, and you see a lot of outreach, a lot of, hey, let's go out for coffee. Let's talk. I want to learn about your firm, and let's team. Well, there's other things that don't get done, are constantly being kicked down the road. And I know there's a lot of frustration as we sit there and we talk about, here's the list of all the stuff I wish I had time to do. And on there's, refining that website and staff training, and probably most importantly, industry research and taking time to really assess your competition, what your clients want, and doing those debriefs with clients and getting surveys and just heightening the state of the practice for your firm. But so what that means is that what comes down must go up. So if we are only looking at economic expansion and the value of marketing in it, we're missing the bigger picture, which is that while there are several things that are hot and heavy during expansions, there's things that aren't. And the inverse is that when the economy contracts, while some things aren't hot and heavy, other things are. And that's when you start to realize that all that work that you say, I don't have time to do this right now, this is the time to do it. This is not the time to be tightening your belt on your marketing resources. This is the time to give them space to do all of the stuff that they just simply have not had enough time for. This is the time to stabilize. So if you think about it as like a jet plane that flies tens of thousands of air miles between services, there's a lot of stress fractures, there's loosened bolts, there's things that can go catastrophically wrong if you don't ground the plane on occasion and just do complete overhauls of it to make sure that the whole system works. A marketing department is not that dissimilar. It's a living, breathing engine of people and systems and operations and processes that it can really get uncalibrated and clunky after years and years of just pushing so aggressively and reactively hard into opportunity. So this is the time to look at your systems and fix them, refine them, audit your competitors, look at your social media feeds, and if you're really using them well, what the return has been on all the effort there, and other types of research and mentoring and trainings and things like that that typically take a back seat during expansions. So that is the first half of the presentation. We're going to be moving into some tactical things that you can do that both addresses all of that psychology and builds up confidence and puts you in a better position to stabilize, but also some tactics that you can use every single year to just continually make your firm very strong in the marketplace and your team really strong and bonded and cohesive together, and just overall functioning at a much higher and happier level. But before we get into those things, let's talk about these recession-oriented action steps. There are 4 of them, and these, going back to the plane analogy, this is the oxygen mask fall from the ceiling. This is now, and this is also for any recession that could come in the future. But there's 4 things that I think are really, really helpful to do, both to kind of reorient yourself and catch your breath and take a moment, but also to set you up for having difficult conversations. And some of them are about overhead reduction and belt tightening that might happen. But by doing these things, you're putting yourself in a position to, again, be at the table and not on it when those conversations are happening. And so we're going to talk about a checklist, a staff assessment, looking at what happened in the last recession, and then communication and quarterly reports. So on the first one, this marketing checkup checklist, this is going to be shared with everybody after the webinar. But just to touch on it for a moment, I think everyone has had that moment. We say, I never have time. I just wish I had half a day or one day where I could just focus on the things that are not proposal related. And then magically you do. You get that half day, you get a quiet day, and it's like your brain just freezes. And you're like, I don't even know where to start. This is a place to start. And it's a really great exercise to have with your staff to sit down and just honestly answer these questions. No defense over why they may or may not have been done or if they're incomplete. It's just to go down the list and answer, yes, we have this in place, and ergo, yes, it's working well, or, oh, we started it, but we never quite finished it, or no, we don't have this at all. Not all of these are going to be relevant to you, and there might even be some that this gets you thinking about, like, oh, there's also this other thing, but it's a good starting point, and it's a really good way to get your whole team, your marketing team, aligned on basically what the needs assessment is for your particular firm, and we all have one. If you're a marketing department of 1, this still works. It's just to orient your brain around the gaps. And once you know what those gaps are, you know where to start. And you know what the stabilizing activities are that you need to do that are very specific to your firm. The second thing is a staff assessment. And I'm going to go with like a 4-team marketing department for this, but it does work for one and it works for many. But essentially, what I'm trying to get at with this is that if you think of a room that's full of musicians that are all playing their instruments, but they're all playing differently, they're playing different songs, they're playing just independent of each other, that is just noise. It's just a room full of noise. But if you can orchestrate all of them, you can create a symphony. And a marketing department functions very much the same way. You have individuals who come in with their own skill set, their own talents, their own levels of experience, and their own hopes and dreams for what they want to work on, their own ambition, communication styles, trainings in different types of things, graphic sensibilities or writing capabilities. And what you have to do is look at your entire marketing function and all of the different components within it and decide who is going to be the keeper of this. That doesn't mean that all the responsibility is on them, but they're the one watching it. They're the one that's making sure that it's performing as well as it can, that is optimized. And that where you have these kind of overlaps between I do this thing over here, it then makes this thing in a completely separate area work better. You start to get that sense of a symphony really working out. And that could be something as simple as the boilerplate updates, the leads tracking, data entry, making sure all of these things are just at your fingertips and ready to go, greases the wheels to make things like, I have to go out to a coffee and I need a cut sheet to take with me. I need the latest facts and figures on this thing. There's all of these different little components that are in there that have to happen in order for something else to happen. And you need to make sure that your staff not only are aware of this, that all of this is happening, but start to get cohesion together on how you do it all in concert together. But also that you've got the ability to pivot and, cross train so that if someone decides to leave or is let go or is sick, that someone else can jump in. A great example of that is leads tracking. But so that's the second one. The third one, and this one is pretty awesome. If you haven't done this before, I really recommend it. It seems kind of onerous on the front end of it. Luckily, you guys are going to get the book, and it spells it out. All of these things are spelled out in the book. Every single one of these steps has kind of a line-by-line action and how much time it takes and all of that baked into it. But so the thing about, the fact that we've had a decade of economic expansion, that's a long time. That some of us weren't even in the industry when the Great Recession happened. There were people that were still in high school that are working in AEC marketing today. But even for those that were, it was a long time ago. It's really easy to forget the specifics of something that happened a decade ago. But even more commonly, we weren't with our firm then. There's a lot of leapfrogging that happens in AEC. People tend to stay at jobs. I think the average is like 3 years, 2 to 3 years, and then they move mainly for opportunity because our departments are so small. To climb the ladder to get higher levels of pay and responsibility, got to leave. So a lot of us weren't even at our firms the last time this happened. And that's a huge blind spot. That's a huge gap in your understanding of how your firm weathered it last time. And so through this exercise, all you simply do is go into your CRM database, your intranet, your Excel files, wherever this data is kept, and you start to extract out in a specific period of time. I like to do 2 years before and about 2 years after the recession point, so that you can see the trends before it hit and then what happened on the backside of it, and then going into recovery. And you want to pull the proposals that were submitted. You want to see how many. So were there drops in the number of proposals? You want to see the fluctuations in the ones that were prime versus sub, the ones that for the public sector versus private. Of course, how much it was in the variations in the amount of the contracts. Like maybe you had more work, but it was for a lot less money per project. And you also want to see how you got it. Was it publicly procured? Was it direct contact? Was it through an on-call? And then most importantly, you want to see what it was. And so the story that I have for this one is that I was doing some research at Echo Northwest, and I was noticing that this one principal at the firm, as I was updating all of the resumes, and we had this huge resume overhaul, that he had this huge body of sewer rate analysis work. And I walked over to his office and I said, do you want the sewer rate analysis work on your resume? Because I haven't seen you go after any sewer rate analysis work. And he said, oh, no, I hate doing that work. And I said, well, why did you do so much of it? And he said, that was my bread and butter during the recession. And I thought, ooh, interesting. Another example, and I'll tie it back to the sewer rate thing, is I also noticed that the firm had this huge treasure trove of brownfield work, brownfield feasibility analysis, helping the state of Oregon calculate out where every single brownfield was throughout the state. It was just brownfield, brownfield, brownfield. And then it just stopped. And I asked someone about it, and they said, oh, yeah, during economic declines, greenfield development is really, really expensive. Brownfield can be, depending on how dirty the site is, but the infrastructure is typically already there. The streets are there, the utilities are there, and in a lot of ways, it's less expensive. And so governments tend to shift their focus towards brownfields. I thought, very interesting. So what we ended up doing, as we knew that this recession was coming, we dusted off the sewer rate analysis work, we dusted off the brownfields, we put them back on the website, we put them back on the resumes. We're already ahead of the game because we know if this stuff over here starts quieting down and we see that this work is just not going to be around for the next couple of years because it's deprioritized for our clients, this stuff worked pretty well last time, and we need to get the jump on all of our competition. So every single person on the call, your firms have this, whatever it was, something got your firm through the last recession. And just simply by going back into your archives, you almost like Sherlock Holmes, you can piece together basically a map for what you should be doing to just help you stay extremely strategic when the bottom line starts to look a little different than it has in the last couple of years. Okay, and then the last immediate step to take is for the marketing directors and managers in the room. One of the responsibilities that typically is talked about a lot at the front end of a job is marketing reports. And how are you going to keep your firm leadership just in the know on what's going on? And a lot of us immediately, all we think of is hit rate. And we're like, oh, we won X percentage of the proposals that we went after. We went after this many proposals. And yeah, it's interesting information, and it can be compelling if you really dig into it. There's a lot more that the marketing department does than just proposals, but we get so in the weeds of actually doing the work that those quarterly reports just stop. I hope I'm not the only one, but I remember months and months going by, and I realized I haven't given any kind of update in like 6 months to the firm leadership on how we're doing, because we're so dang busy. And it's not just that, it also weighs on you like, oh gosh, by the time I actually sit down to do this, and even just the hit rate, which takes time to calculate, but everything else, it's so much work that you can't reconcile taking the time needed. So you end up kicking it down the road even more. And the problem is that while it's kind of an anchor on you mentally that you should be doing it, but you're not, the flip side of that is the leadership sees it's not being done. And this is something that really erodes confidence from firm decision makers to the leaders of the marketing department. And I hate to put it like that because it does take you to a place of such insecurity and almost just fear. But it's true. And this is something that if you're really good at reporting, completely disregard everything I'm saying right now. But if you in the back of your head know that your marketing department needs to be doing a better job of this, now is the time to dust it all off and have a very honest, open, and candid conversation with your direct supervisors, with those leaders in the firm that you have that portal, that communication portal to say, look, this has not been happening at the pace that it should because we've been so busy. We need to let you know what we're working on, and we need you to weigh in on that with your strategy so that we know we're doing the right things with this time that we have right now. You can message it in a way that just puts the focus where it should be, which is on, we need to get our heads wrapped around this together. And you need to also have the conversation on what they want to see and how. Because if you just, after today, are like, I'm going to take a half a day and I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do this, and you crank out some 10-page Word report that is chock full of really interesting insights and information, but no one's going to read it, they're not going to appreciate it because they know you took time to do it and you didn't include them. You have to start by having a conversation. Do they want a PowerPoint? Do they want just a simple bullet list in an email? Do they want a verbal recitation of what's going on? Or do they want that Word document? You got to know before you start on it. But it's incredibly important. Reestablish communication if the communication is broken down, because it's going to be really, really important when those conversations come up, if they come up, about where to make cost saving measures. Okay, so on to the last leg of the presentation, the 10 activities that I think marketing departments should do every year. And this is both to just really improve your agility, but maybe even more importantly, this is for all of your team, to both for their professional growth, but also for their camaraderie and their commitment to your firm. So the very first one is extremely deceptively easy and is incredibly helpful. This one is kind of ties to that feeling of like you are inundated with proposals and you don't have time for anything else feeling that you get at certain times of the year. I don't know about you. I can't remember how many Thanksgivings and Christmas breaks have been ruined by these really inconsiderate deadlines put forward by clients that want like an 80-page proposal, and it's just terrible, and it comes with the territory. We've all been there, you know, whether it's that time of year in spring or summer or whatever. But because our firms are fairly consistent in their clientele, you have a certain mix of public and private types of clients. They have funding cycles typically. Even on the private side, there's a cyclical type of nature because a lot of the work is tied to things that are tied to city funds or county funds or whatever. But there is some kind of a tidal rhythm to your proposal machine. And so all you have to do is go into your CRM, your intranet, Excel sheets, or wherever the data is kept, and literally just count the number of proposal numbers that were opened per month, the ones that required marketing. It's not everything is going to need, sometimes a letter of interest, sometimes it's abandoned. The stuff that required your marketing staff and resources to put together, count them up by month, and then just make a very simple chart in Excel. And what you end up getting is this picture of your peak times of year where you see more proposals than other times of the year. And what this ends up helping you do is plan around them. You do not want to plan for a major marketing initiative in February or March if this is what your calendar looks like. You can start talking about other things that have to do with the year as a total when you can see this first and foremost. And that gets into the second thing, which is creating a calendar that has a really long outlook ahead of it. And I'm just going to go ahead and spoil it, but the 10th thing in this list is a marketing retreat. And this is a really good exercise to do during a retreat when you can have everybody together, hopefully in person. I hope we're getting there soon. It works best with just a giant piece of butcher paper rolled onto a wall with markers and rulers and different colors for different things, and you're all up there filling it out. And the very first thing you do is you put when your peaks occur. So that's the busy periods that you see here. And then you start filling it in with all of these other things that are going on, including the reports and when the reports are due to leadership. Retirements, which are really important, because when a retirement happens, not only do you have to honor the person on their way out, there's a ton of succession planning that has to happen both internally and externally. Marketing must play a role in that. There's retreats. There's stuff that is like the big thing. We're redoing the website, or we're redoing our brand. And you want to set the expectation both for yourselves and your leadership that that's going to be happening over a very long period of time. And you start to build out a plan around it, taking every other thing into consideration so that you can really harness time and make it work for you instead of vice versa. The last thing, and it's not reflected here, but it's really, really important, is you got to put on when the baby is due, or when someone's moving into their new apartment or their new house, or a graduation is occurring, or a major vacation. You want to note these things on here because it does affect your staff resources, but it's the good stuff. It's the personal stuff, and that's important that your staff are bringing themselves into their jobs. You need to honor that when you're thinking through all of this, because it will play on both your ability to do things, but also on, you know, sometimes their head is not going to be as in the game because they got something else going on. So you want to capture that there too. So you're seeing the full picture. And then the third thing, and this is very dialed into each individual on your team, is you got to get really clear about where their time is going. And this is kind of an imperfect slide. It's really dated compared to what's in the book. So if you're going to flip to anything first, I would flip to this one. And I'm just going to tell very quickly an anecdotal story. I had one of my staffers. She was a marketing coordinator in our Seattle office. In order to get her in that position in that office, I had to make it 50% front desk admin and receptionist because they just didn't think there was enough for either role in the office yet. It was still fairly new. And we said, okay. And it's like, but if it gets to the point where we can prove that there's enough marketing work for her to do this full time, then we talk about hiring someone for the admin work, correct? And I said, yes. And so she comes in, she was miserable. And it was right before our marketing retreat. I could just tell she had a 1,000-yard stare, one-word answers, not really engaged in team check-ins. And I just said, how are you? And she's like, I'm hanging on by a thread. She's like, I can't tell you because I would have to sit down and make a list that's longer than what I can say out loud to you right now. But I don't like my job. I love the marketing team. I love the work we do. I hate my job. And it was like 2 days before our retreat. So I went in and I pulled her timesheets. And it took a while to do this because we didn't have a lot of time codes that would really make the process easy. I had to pull off of the comments section from her timesheet to get a sense of what she was doing every day. And then from there, I took every other person on the team and then crafted theirs too. And then I made these big charts, put them up on the wall, and we talked about it at the retreat. When we got to that portion of the retreat, I put them up on the wall. She walked up to it, looked at it, and oh, God, it still makes me want to choke up. She wept, burst into tears. This was not how she wanted to live her life. And seeing it visualized on the wall, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think we all ended up crying. And so then I got up there and I said, okay, this is the hard part. I said, but what we can do now, we're seeing all of our time visualized in front of us. We can take these markers. Let's draw new ones. Let's draw what we want to see. And so we did. And he said, well, if I spend a little more time doing this, that means you can spend a little more time doing this. And we made our perfect pie chart for each other, for ourselves. And we committed that everything else in the retreat that day, that was going to be applied as a lens in all of the discussions. How do we achieve our optimum use of our time, not only for the company, but for us? And so that's exactly what we did. We also went to our accounting department and asked for very specific time codes, and you'll see them in the book. I mean, everything you can think of. We got nitty gritty, granular at what we were billing our time to, so we could really see. And it was tied to that marketing functions chart. My time was going to this specific task in this specific bucket. And by the time we got to the retreat the next year, we'd made the case that there was more than enough work. So my colleague got to be a full-time marketing coordinator. We had a part-time admin in that office. And I pulled up the pie charts and I put them on the wall. And this is almost exactly 1 year later. She walks up to it. She has her hands like Superman style on her waist. And she's looking at him with this huge smile on her face. And she is talking about all of the ideas that she's got, all of the stuff she wants to do. Her sense of loyalty to the firm, to the team, and to her job was 100%. And it was such a marked difference from the year before. And I just remember thinking that time itself is something that can rule us in every way possible. But if we can get our hands wrapped around that and have really meaningful conversations with each other about where it's really going, not only do we make our sense of time and the value of it work for us on a personal level, it ends up making everything better. And so, yes, you track the time, you see where those responsibilities are, and from there you can start to really modify and finesse it and tease out the opportunities for professional growth. Because hopefully everyone on your team is a future manager or director. Hopefully everyone has the potential of being that and running their own department someday, because they get so good at doing everything along the way. And then the last part of this, before I leave this slide, is that you are not going to be able to do everything. There isn't enough time, even during recessions, to get everything done. And so I think it's really valuable for every team to talk about release valves, to talk about this idea of every once in a while outsourcing something. Independent contractors, especially if you do a ton of editorial work, or you should, because there's tons of feedback coming in from clients that the QA/QC on written materials is just terrible, or even proposals when you are completely slammed, or if layout is just a huge problem and you have a lot of reports that you're doing, or there's marketing materials that maybe you're just above your staff's pay grade and you know you need someone else to do it instead of you spinning your wheels trying to figure it out. But then there's also interns, and we'll get into that one in a second. But anyway, that this number 3 is very, very near and dear to my heart. So if you're going to flip to anything, flip to that section first. Okay, so talking about interns a little more in depth. Interns are something that a lot of our firms have all over the place, but they're typically on the technical side. A lot of people are like, a marketing intern? Are you crazy? That is so extravagant, but it's not. Because if you think about what a silver sponsorship costs to a big conference, it's typically about the amount of money that you would spend for an intern over a 10-week period of time, about 10 hours a week, and they crack out something that has been an immovable object for your team. Resumes is a great example of this. I can't tell you how many frustrated technical staff I've worked with who have said, just exasperated, I've written this already. Why are you asking me to write this again? Or why is this still on my resume? It's so old. Or I've worked on 20 things since then. Why aren't they on here? And of course I have moments where I want to, throw it back at them and say, yeah, why isn't it on there? It's your resume. But it doesn't quite work like that. And we are here to make sure that they all look good, that the templates are all consistent, that there's no typos in them. Getting in an intern to come in and clean all that up and update them with all of the projects it is like waving a magic wand over something that we bang our heads against a wall about a lot. But it's not just that. It's also doing all sorts of research and Google Analytics on traffic on your website and audits of your competition and your social media. Invaluable. I would hope that if you find yourself in situations where you're like, there's so much we want to do, we don't have the time to do it, consider bringing on an intern. And it's not just that it'll get done. It also gives you an opportunity to potentially see your next employee. And it has happened. They come in, they fall in love with the work. If they're doing the research about your firm, or they're doing a resume overhaul, they're going to know your jargon. They're going to know your brand. They're going to know the staff. And you might have on your hands a marketing assistant or an incoming proposal coordinator. And it is a really, really great way to bring new people in. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about this one for very long, but all of us have had that awful, awful, awful moment of someone storming in, red-faced, going, I tracked this for a year. I had my team together. The client and I have talked about this off the record, and I just found out from someone else that this RFP hit the streets 2 weeks ago. How did we miss this? And it's like this chill runs down your spine, and you're like, how did we miss it? And it happens. A lot of our firms will have some sort of online vendor that aggregates leads. Sometimes we do it all ourselves off of some massive spreadsheet. When we visit site after site, we look at the DJCs. We have to track the leads. And sometimes those filters are screwed up, or they are not keeping up with the type of work that we need to be on the lookout for, or we're just getting a ton of chaff and the good stuff is so buried in there that it's hard to find. But once a year, you have to take time and you have to talk internally and with any vendor that you might have to make sure that it is performing as optimally as possible. And the second part is you have to diversify who's tracking them. Because if you have someone quit or is sick or for some reason is not going to be there, somebody has to do this. So making sure that people are cross-trained is really important on this one. And the reason why I bring it up is something that you just have to focus on it every single year is because when that awful conversation happens of how did we miss this, it is really eroding confidence in the marketing department and making folks that you're going to have to work with probably on that proposal who are now disgruntled. But it's also that when that happens, there's an aversion that takes over and you're like, I need to figure out why we missed this. The next day, you're already working at something else, and then that time goes by and you totally forget about it until the next time somebody blows up and something gets missed. So just set it for a certain time of year. This is going to happen. And then the client survey. So there's several different options online. SurveyMonkey and I think Survey Sparrow is another one that's really awesome that's around. You can do these for free. This is not a heavy lift kind of thing. It's like 10 questions or less and it's free. And you can develop really, really awesome surveys that are very, very effective, extremely fast to take, and will get you not only really good feedback from clients on how things are going, but also testimonials. And in some cases, like one where we had sent out this survey and the client gave us dismal points, like scored horribly across the metrics that we had asked, and then had a comment at the bottom saying, I've worked with you for years. I have filtered so much money to your firm, and I've always been happy with the work. This last one was a disaster. The person I trusted there delegated it to someone who didn't know what they were doing. And I am so upset about this that if you hadn't sent me the survey, I wouldn't have said anything. I just never would have hired you again. And we took that immediately, turned it around, sent it to the president of the company. He then took it, picked up the phone, called her directly, and repaired the relationship. We refunded money. We redid work product for them. And in the end, she is more loyal than ever and has hired us for 3 projects since then. So it can avert disaster, but it also can amass all of this really awesome information that helps you make the case for certain types of things along the way, including staff development for the technical side. I won't go into all the details of how to set this up because there's all sorts of considerations on how do you get buy-off from the powers that be to allow you to deploy the survey at such a massive scale to all your clients. There's all sorts of write-ups in there on how to do that. And then number 7 is social media audit. This is not that hard to do. What we find ourselves doing a lot of times is kind of like wrapping ourselves around the axle of social media. Are we posting too often? Are we not posting enough? How do we come up with compelling content? How do we grow our followership? How much time and resources should we be devoting to this? And we never really feel victorious that we've solved it. And part of that is because we're operating in typically a huge vacuum and we're just doing what we think is the right amount of energy and activity on social media. You can easily find this out by simply putting down in a simple table the competition, like your main competition. It doesn't have to be every single firm, but like the top 3 or 4 firms, as well as firms that you really admire. They don't have to be direct competition. You just think that they're doing an awesome job. And then you go down the list, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Those seem to be the top 5. Instagram is mostly firms that have lots of eye candy. So architecture firms use a lot, design firms, construction firms use show the cranes going up in the air and people on site. Engineers don't typically. A lot of people are gravitating away from Facebook. And then Twitter feeds are also shutting down at pretty high rates. LinkedIn is blowing up and is huge. But you can go on there, you can see how many followers they have, what's the frequency of the posts, like go back 6 months, And what are they posting? Are they posting branded babies in cute little onesies all the time, or dogs? Are they posting about projects? Are they doing thought leadership pieces and white papers? And what does the engagement look like? How many likes are they getting? You want to see all of this. Are they posting the same identical content to every single platform, or are they tailoring it to something a little different? And once you see that, you get a baseline. Then you just do a little more than that and you've won. Or you can look at it and say, I saw one the other day. They have 65,000 followers. They post 22 times on average a month. And on average, they get 60 likes and like 2 or 3 comments on the stuff. So the engagement is literally almost non-existent compared to the number of followers they're getting to look at their stuff. So it's like, is this really a good use of their time? And are they doing it right? If the engagement and the interest is that low. Twitter is even worse. I mean, there's almost no reaction at all. So it's like shouting into a void. Do you want to spend your time doing that, or do you want to spend it doing other things? So this will just help you get a sense of how hard you need to push on the gas on it, and if you're pushing on the gas in the right places, and if you even need that particular social media platform or not. This one I'm just going to glance off it really quickly, go into a lot more detail in the book about it. But this idea of a marketing budget, a lot of marketing departments are not given a budget. They're just told to spend it. And yeah, you might have to get permission for a banner or a booth display or a piece of swag or something along those lines. But a lot of times it's not meaningfully tracked. Sponsorships aren't holistically, meaningfully tracked across the entire firm. Tables. How many staff are going to that conference? How many entrance fees did we have to pay? Then all of these numbers add up. And if you're not tracking it, you're spending more than you have to. And you're probably spending it in places that you don't have to. And you're probably not spending enough in areas that you should be spending it. If you get really analytical about where that money is going, you can get really, really smart about making sure every single dollar matters more. And if you do start doing that and you're tracking it on a very simple Google spreadsheet or an Excel spreadsheet, and you're watching where those dollars are, that kind of information is really valuable to firm leaders who are constantly watching the bottom line, to know that you are fiscally responsible as well, so that when you have those conversations about cost reductions, you look at that first. You don't look at the staff. So you look at that and say, we could tone this down. We should probably keep this hot because this organization, AGC, is pulling so many people together for events and everything. We need to make sure that our logo is front and center and that we are continuing to support them. And also, let's think about our own events that we can partner on and get good information out there. And you can start to get really, really strategic in how you're spending the money. But if you're not even given a number to hit, a target to hit, you have nowhere to start. So ask, if you don't have a budget, ask for one. And it doesn't even have to be a lot. It's just, you got to start with something. So, okay, 2 more things and then we're done. So second to last thing is all about increasing IQ of all the staff in your firm on what it is that you actually do. So I'll give an example. I had in my office back before remote working, I would have this one individual routinely wander into my office and say, just got off the phone with the client, let them know that we would get them this thing in 2 days. And the thing that he had promised was like 8 hours worth of work. And we had 4 deadlines going on things that were due at the time, and a staffer going on PTO, like you name it. We did not have time to do it. Something was going to end up getting sacrificed or done badly, or I was going to have to say, we can't do that. And marketers are trained to never say no. So that situation is essentially an impossible, awful situation that you don't like finding yourself in. But the problem is that that individual had no idea that we had all this other stuff going on. He's only ever known us for one thing, which is servicing proposals for him, for his clients. And so I ended up buying this massively large whiteboard that turned portrait style, looks just like this, and took electrical tape and created a calendar grid for 2 months We got a bunch of different color dry erase markers, allocated them. So red was priming efforts, green was subbing, blue was business development, orange was in staff meetings and trainings, purple was report layout, pink was editorial, and there was another color that was PTO and personal stuff. I'm not going to be in the office kind of stuff. And we used that thing every single day. And it just filled up, and including the staff in our Seattle office, they had the calendar up too, and they were identical. We checked in twice a week on Mondays and on Wednesdays, and we would update the calendar with every single thing that was going on. Pretty soon, that same individual would come in, and how it started was it would be like, I just got a phone with a client, da da da. And instead of me saying no, I let the calendar say no. So I would like motion my hand and say, well, on the day that you say this to, help me figure this out. Help me figure out how do we get all this done in this new deadline? And seeing it all there, it took the pressure off of me as being the bad guy, and it put it onto the calendar saying, this is just reality. And so after that, he would come wandering and he wouldn't even look at me. Instead, he'd go right up to the calendar and look at it and assess. And then he'd point to a day and he would ask, would this date work if I have this thing for you? And that's when I knew it was really working. Not only was he respecting the fact that we had a lot of other stuff going on, but the line of communication was truly open to figuring out how to get it all done. And that level of understanding and comprehension of what we did as a whole team for the whole firm just built up that appreciation for the fact that marketing was this really, really multidimensional, very active department that was now seen as multifaceted instead of just through one lens. So it's a little harder to do that in a virtual world. It's not impossible. A lot of people use Teams, OneNote. A lot of people use Slack. A lot of people use Trello. There's all sorts of things that you can use, I would say interim, but also think about how you could make them a little bit more permanent depending on what things really look like when we come out the other side of this thing. Get creative with it. If you do end up going full-time in the office, ask accounting for a whiteboard. Okay, and then the last thing is a retreat. Our firms all take them, but marketing staff doesn't always. Some have never done a retreat. Others do one like every 5 years or so. This should happen every year, and it should be a full day. And it should be an agenda that is written by the entire team. And one of the components that has to get worked into it is a SWOT analysis. And it is not a SWOT analysis the way that I think it's best done. That means that you end on the threats. And I think that is a terrible place to end when you're doing an exercise like this. You want the strengths, the weaknesses, and the threats to inform what your opportunities are. And doing this exercise together in a very simple way can have profound impacts on unveiling where those opportunities are, both internally and externally to the firm. Doing the time calculations and looking at where your time went, doing the wall calendar, and the book has the whole thing of all these different things that could easily take up 6 hours with lots of food, some breaks built in there, and hopefully not one cell phone or laptop in the room, unless that laptop is there for note taking. Just try and go offline for one whole day and sell your firm on that, so that when you come back, you are in a much better position to just be the marketing department that everybody needs and wants and loves, and had no idea that they could have. So big deal. Please try and convince your firm to let you do it. Okay, so just to reiterate, proposal peaks, the calendar, your staff resources, interns, leads tracking, client survey, social media, a marketing budget, communication and transparency of what you do in the marketing department, and a retreat. Those are 10 areas that every year need to have brain power, time, dedication put to them. There's almost no money in any of these. Other than maybe the retreat that you're taking your staff offline for a day, a lot of these are free. the intern is essentially one sponsorship. It's equivalent to one high-end sponsorship. This is stuff you can pull off. It's just about timing it correctly and knowing really good, efficient steps to getting it done. And then just to reiterate on the action steps, there's the checklist, the staff assessment, looking back at how your firm weathered the last recession, and reinvigorating communication with your leadership. Those are the things that should happen now, right now. And this is just, even if we were in a recession, it's good stuff. So I'm going to end on this quote because I love it and it really resonates with me, and I hope it does with you. It's that a recession can be a blessing, as it is much easier to spot a strong company without the noise of a strong economy. So think about this. No, recessions only last on average 11 months. There is a rebuild time after that. It gives you time to stabilize. It gives you time to reorient yourself in your market. And it gives you time to figure out how to increase your share of the market coming out the other side of it. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and get back to the regular room. We have, I think, about 6 minutes left. So thank you very much. I know it's a ton. I think you're getting a recording of this and the slide deck and that checklist too. So we have some time for questions if anyone has any. It won't hurt my feelings if you're stunned into silence either. Okay, so Allie, I don't know if you want to jump on and fill anything with me, but it looks like Trap Lenny asks, any new lessons learned since writing the book? It's a really good question because I actually started giving this presentation in 2018 before the recession happened. People just knew the other shoe was going to drop. And I started giving it as here are the indicators to follow for when a recession could hit, and here's what you could think about doing if it does. And it's definitely been refined over time, but this thing hit us like a ton of bricks in ways that no one anticipated. And I think that what I'm finding in the presentations I've given of this whole topic since it's become a reality and not theoretical is that firms are acting different than they did in the last recession. There's just a better IQ around the value of marketing business development. But I think the biggest distinguisher is social media. Because in 2008, while the recession was taking hold, the iPhone was introduced. So social media is essentially, 11 years old? I mean, there's MySpace and Facebook was just kind of fledgling, but it was the iPhone, it was a smartphone that really allowed it to become what it is. And because of that, we've created this online community for knowledge sharing, as well as also a place to vent and to talk about missteps and to call out firms, but also lift them up and delve into like our greater role in the community. I see so much more community right now than in past recessions. You don't feel as isolated in it. So I think that is something I've seen play out since the book came out. And also I think there's just some uncertainty about going back to work, and is there going to be a hybrid, and what opportunities are there with us being in this more nebulous space of how do we connect with each other? How far is our reach if it's not just bound by geography? So I think that there's also some room there to think about as well. So thank you, Trap, for asking that question. Okay, everybody. I think Allie is MIA at the moment, so I might have to wrap things up here.
Nope, I'm here. I'm here. Just wanted to give anybody last minute chance to ask any questions, but if there aren't any, just to reiterate what Allison said, I will be sending up a follow-up email with the slide deck and the checklist and a copy of the Zoom recording and Allison's contact information if you want to follow up after the session. But Allison, thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us and to present this. Very, very informative, very relevant information, and we appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellie. It's been great working with you, and thank you to everybody who made time today. And know that it's a lot of information, so I appreciate you sticking around to hear it.
Everyone have a great day. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.